The case industry is currently obsessed with $70 to $100 mid-towers that share a few similar features like power supply shrouds, minimalistic drive support, and generally a move away from 5¼ bays. This is a trend that we think started with the NZXT H440 a couple years ago, and it has persisted through the Phanteks Eclipse P400, which is brand new, Rosewell's new Gungnir case, the NZXT S340, and now Corsair's 400C, which is what we're reviewing today. All of these cases have a sort of unique take on the idea of a mid-tower in the $70 to $100 range with a power supply shroud and cleaner cable management, and today we are looking at Corsair's take on that idea. Corsair's 400C follows hot on the heels of its 600C launch, both fronting a similarly clean exterior but drastically different under the hood. We reviewed the 600C favorably for its risky take on inverted motherboard installation and further praised the 600C for chart-topping GPU cooling performance. The 400C is similar really only in appearance. Internally, the $90 400C and 400Q cases host a more traditional motherboard mount. They remove optical drive bays that were in the 600C and shrink the overall size of the case by a couple of inches. Check the article in the description below for more specifics on the case, internals, the test methodology, and aesthetics discussion. Corsair's 400C is targeted at the sub $100 market, landing itself amongst a herd of similarly priced, similarly designed alternatives. The S340 has been around for a while now and is a staple case for mid-towers, and the Phanteks Eclipse P400 is brand new, as is Rosewell's Gungnir, and they all have common design interests, common price for the most part, and different implementations of power supply shrouds and cable management features. Corsair, however, makes the biggest claims with regard to functionality and cooling performance. In this review, we're looking at ease of installation, thermal performance of CPU and GPU temperatures on the diode level, and then we also have some unique tests that I think a lot of other sites won't offer, and that's because we tested almost every possible air cooling configuration in here. Did not do the liquid stuff, but tested the case fan placement, checked for optimal fan placement if you add another fan, and we learned a bit along the way about how air coolers, tower coolers, and blower fans interact with one another in a case like this, a mid-tower case. Starting with the basics, the 400C abandons optical drive support and moves the 3.5-inch drive cages to the bottom front of the case, concealed partly by the two-piece power supply shroud. The shroud somewhat reminds us of the Half X and its original one-piece shroud, and it's not riveted to the case with the 400C, it's just two plastic components that lock together for better cable concealment. You can remove these if you want to. Corsair intelligently positions a PCIe routing hole in the top of the PSU shroud, allowing direct and clean GPU wiring. Unfortunately, a few issues do stem from this region of the case. The first is with 180mm or larger PSUs, and Corsair correctly advertises that the 400C can support 180mm PSUs like our test PSU, and actually will support a bit larger, but the 3.5-inch hard drive cage must be removed to adequately support our 180mm modular PSU. The cables were pinched right against the cages and were unusable until the removal of those cages. Once gone, we're left to rely upon the three 2.5-inch SSD sleds on the rear of the motherboard tray, since there's no additional 3.5-inch drive support throughout the case. But this was okay because we're actually pretty impressed with Corsair's 2.5-inch drive sled, and as trivial a thing as it is, the spring-loaded action and general design of the sled allows for very easy installation and an overall improved user experience. This is something we hope will be adopted as the case industry moves forward with these types of cases. The 400C's PSU shroud also proved restrictive with front I/O connectors. We had to route the cabling above the PSU shroud, which is functionally fine, but a little bit uglier. Corsair could improve this by lengthening the cables to better support motherboards which inset the FPC, or it could shorten the PSU shroud length marginally so that the cables don't get as pinched and make it difficult to close the power supply shroud and latch it together. Stock cooling is simplified to a set of two fans, one 140mm and one 120mm fan in the rear, and that shoots a straight line of air from the front and out the back because the 400C's PSU shroud has been shifted to the bottom, and that means that all the cooling is basically up at the top of this case. So you can do two top-mounted fans in the top if you wanted to add 140s or fit larger radiators, 240, 280 included, and we tested a few non-stock configurations with these top-mounted fans and a second front-mounted fan to determine which setup made the best sense when looking at CPU and GPU thermals. Time to start talking about cooling. For the full methodology, hit the link in the description below to learn about how we do these tests and check out the greater details that may not be revealed in this video. What we're looking at today includes CPU and GPU diode temperatures. We're also measuring the impact of fans as placed in different locations of the case, and then we'll do a comparative analysis toward the end against the other similarly priced cases on the market. Let's start with our 400C specific test for optimal case fan placement. You can see a quick chart of what we tested here, but it's perhaps a bit more clear on the website. Our range for these tests is just 4.07 Celsius, so that's a 43.6 to 39.53 Celsius range, and all in all, a fairly inconsequential performance impact. But the world of cooling is often a fight for single degree gains, if that. So a single degree is a pretty big deal with these cases. The stock configuration performs only marginally worse than mounting an additional 140mm fan in the front, and that's aligned with the GPU, so it makes sense. Optimal CPU cooling scenarios all center around intake-heavy setups with one rear fan still mounted. Top exhaust setups actually end up siphoning fresh, cool intake from the CPU before the air ever hits the tower cooler, and that effectively suffocates the CPU for a constant flow of cool air from the front intake. Despite its insignificance for CPU thermals, adding the lower mounted 140mm intake fan noticeably improved GPU cooling performance within the 400C, a delta of 2.66 Celsius or 4.64% difference. And this is the best possible configuration for raw GPU thermals. Note that ours uses a blower fan, so it may vary if you have push fans. This is the configuration we'd probably recommend as a go-to, just adding one extra 140mm in the front bottom intake. Interestingly, dumping more cool air into the system from the top doesn't further improve GPU thermals. There's an improvement over stock, but GPU temps actually increase slightly from the 140mm front intake addition configuration. And this is because the top intake fans assist in dissipating heat from the tower cooler, which is reflected in diminished CPU thermals, but as a result, that heat gets pushed down and into the back of the GPU. If you're adding one fan, we think it makes the most sense to place that fan in the front bottom slot. Moving on to the comparative analysis, we look at the 400C, the Fantax Eclipse P400 brand new case, NZXT's staple S340, the Rosewell Gungnir, also new, and then we've included Corsair's $150 600C because although it's a different market, it's tied by family to the 400C, so we want to see a comparison of how these two differ when it comes to the one, $60-ish price difference, and two, the size difference in the 400C. The 600C shows a 5.25% advantage over the Corsair 400C, with the entire chart demonstrating a range of 3.25 Celsius. The 400C runs at 58.60 Celsius for the GPU, but has a slightly hotter idle than its nearby competition at 4.97 Celsius. Competing cases operate idle at 3.15 C to 4.22 C for the GPU. This is effectively inconsequential to basically all users, and seems like result of the stock intakes fan positioning. That's what's causing this difference. For CPU thermals, we again see higher idle temperatures than some competitors. The S340 runs a bit warm, a trend for NZXT's recent and steel-heavy cases, but load temperatures are fully acceptable at 41.47 Celsius. In fact, CPU load thermals for the 400C plant it firmly above its same-priced competition, beaten out in this chart only by Corsair's own 600C. The chart range is 3.21 Celsius load with a 400C versus S340 load delta of just 1.08%, which is wholly imperceptible. And the Fantax Eclipse P400 has a slightly more noticeable gain. So you see the 400C outperforming the Fantax Eclipse P400 by 3.65%, again favoring the 400C. So that's still small, but it is certainly more noticeable than the 1.08% of the S340. The Corsair 400C has a high build quality overall, strong assembly, and uses good materials. It's got superior cooling performance to all of the cases we tested that are similar to this one, other than, of course, Corsair 600C, which is a bit more expensive. And overall, it's a pretty good case to build with. There are a few complaints we had, the main one being the power supply limitation. So if you're running a 180 or larger PSU, you are going to encounter some issues with the hard drive cages. So do keep that in mind. You may actually want to downsize your PSU if you haven't bought it yet. The other thing, in terms of build quality, this front panel uses little plastic clips that are very easy to snap off from just one or two removal cycles if you're not very careful. And that is something we've seen with these similar clips on Corsair cases in the past. Something I'd like Corsair to do would be to adopt something like the Manta mounting mechanism, which you can see in our article on the Manta, and that uses basically reinforced pegs rather than these sort of clips that you depress to get out of the case. And they're much stronger, it's easier to pop on and off, there's less fear of damaging something. So that is a major point of improvement I think Corsair should look toward in the future. And I don't mean those little alligator clips that pinch either, those won't really fix the issue. The side window is pretty nice, I do like these sort of larger, wide form factor side windows. It gives a good look at the inside of the case. There's no restrictions in terms of visibility due to the hard drive cages, but the one thing that is a bit annoying is when you're building the case, the side panel is hinged, so it can't be completely removed, and that's obviously a little bit annoying when it's out on a table. It requires 2 times the space because you've got the hinged door hanging out there, but very small because 1, how often are you going to be rebuilding these cases anyway, and 2, how often are you going to be opening that side window. The Corsair 400C case does have pretty good thermals. It's imperceptible to the general user in terms of differences between this case and the others on the bench, actually imperceptible to basically all users, but it is superior in that regard, so we have to give it credit for that. Build quality, other than the few complaints mentioned, is fairly high, and overall the case is unoffensive in terms of its appearances, but I will let you decide if you like it or not from the B-roll. That's really what the video is for anyway. So overall, $90 does put it a bit above the nearby competition. I would strongly suggest researching the NZXT S340, the Phanteks P400 new Eclipse case, and then you could look at some other cases too, like the 600C, the Roswell Gungnir, I suppose, is worth looking at while you're in there. But the main ones would be the S340 and the 400C, and then you make your decision on those based really mostly on what you think looks the best, because in terms of cooling, they're fairly similar. In terms of build and installation and features, they're fairly similar. So it's mostly going to come down to aesthetics, and that is wholly up to you to decide. Thank you all for watching. Link in the description below for more information. Hit that Patreon link in the post-roll video if you want to help us out directly, and I'll see you all next time.